It was past midnight when the guards finally stopped hearing the strange tapping sounds. They assumed it was the old pipes again. What they didn't know was that beneath their feet, hidden behind a wooden trapdoor, no bigger than a suitcase, 3 Allied prisoners were crawling through a tunnel only inches wider than their shoulders, surrounded by dirt, silence, and the constant fear of suffocating before they reached freedom. This wasn't Stalag Luft 3. It wasn't Colditz Castle. It was a little-known German POW camp, where one of the boldest and strangest prison breaks of World War II took place. And almost no one knows the story. Stay with the video until the end, because this escape doesn't unfold the way you expect. The story begins in 1943 at a remote German prisoner of war camp known as Stalag 21D, located near the quiet town of Poznan. Unlike the iconic camps filled with pilots or officers, Stalag 21D held mostly British, Australian, and Polish soldiers captured during the early months of the war. The camp wasn't famous. There were no movies about it, no best-selling books, but the men trapped behind its barbed wire fences were every bit as desperate for freedom. Conditions were harsh. Wooden huts with leaking roofs, barely enough food, and constant surveillance from German guards who believed this camp was too small and insignificant to ever see an escape attempt. They were wrong, because inside Hut 16, a group of prisoners quietly formed a plan, so insane and so dangerous that even hardened soldiers thought it would fail. A plan to dig a tunnel directly beneath the guards' barracks, the last place anyone would expect. And the mastermind behind it was a former British coal miner named Albert Chambers, a man whose entire life had prepared him for this moment. The idea came to Chambers while standing in the freezing yard during roll call. He noticed that during winter mornings, patches of frost melted faster near the guard's office. It could only mean one thing: underground heating pipes. Pipes meant hollow spaces. Hollow spaces meant potential pathways. Chambers shared his theory with a small circle of trusted prisoners. They agreed. If they dug downward just a few meters, they could intercept the heating system, follow it, and emerge outside the perimeter fence. But the risk was enormous. The soil was sandy. Tunnels frequently collapsed. Guards patrolled day and night. And the camp was so small that any unusual noise echoed through the huts. If anyone was caught digging, the punishment was brutal: solitary confinement, beatings, or worse. Yet the men believed freedom was worth the danger. So they began collecting the most unlikely tools: spoons from the mess hall, iron hooks from broken bed frames, tin cans from Red Cross parcels, a rope made from torn blankets. A group of Polish prisoners volunteered as decoys, loudly playing cards every night to mask the scraping sounds from beneath the floorboards. Meanwhile, Chambers and his team measured the tunnel route using chess pieces. They secretly marked distances on the board so that even if the map was discovered, it looked like a regular game in progress. Every detail mattered because the smallest mistake meant death. The first night of digging revealed the tunnel's biggest threat: collapse. The sandy soil caved in almost immediately, burying the end of the passage and nearly suffocating the man inside. They needed support beams, but where do you find wood in a POW camp? The prisoners came up with a solution so bold, it almost defied logic. They ripped the floorboards from underneath their own beds, one at a time, so the guards wouldn't notice. Each plank was cut into narrow strips and smuggled into the tunnel. Slowly, the walls became reinforced. Slowly, the tunnel grew longer. Each night, the digging team emerged covered in dirt. To hide it, they mixed the soil with the ashes of burned newspapers and spread it across the yard during morning exercise, pretending it was gravel. It worked. After 37 nights, the tunnel stretched far enough to reach the heating pipe. But then came an unexpected problem. The pipe was too hot to touch. Anyone who crawled alongside it risked serious burns. The solution? Wet cloth wrapped around their arms, made from torn shirts, soaked in the camp latrine water. It smelled terrible, but it prevented burns long enough for the prisoners to inch forward. Now, they were only meters from the fence line. Freedom was so close they could taste it. But the most dangerous night was still ahead. On March 17th, 1944, the prisoners decided the tunnel was finally long enough. The escape team consisted of 3 men: Albert Chambers, Sergeant William Pratt, and Private Merrick Kowalski. At 2 a.m., they gathered in Hut 16, while the rest of the prisoners created noise to mask their descent. One by one, the men lowered themselves into the narrow shaft, a space so tight they couldn't turn their heads. The first problem happened immediately. The rope snapped. Kowalski dropped the last meter and nearly crushed the tunnel floor. But the structure held. The men steadied themselves, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. They crawled forward in complete darkness, following the warmth of the heating pipe like blind moles. Above them, only a thin layer of soil separated them from German boots. Finally, after what felt like hours, Chambers reached the end. He pushed upward. Nothing. The earth wouldn't budge. He pushed again, using every ounce of strength left. Still, nothing. Panic set in. Had they miscalculated? Were they still inside the perimeter? Pratt whispered through clenched teeth. Try again. Chambers pushed one last time. This time, the soil broke. Cold night air rushed into the tunnel. They emerged beneath a pile of bushes, outside the fence. But their escape wasn't over. They still had to cross open farmland, avoid German patrols, and travel dozens of kilometers to reach the Polish resistance. and dawn was only hours away. When morning roll call began, the camp guards noticed something strange. 3 beds looked different. The floorboards beneath them were loose. They sounded the alarm. German patrol teams spread out into the countryside. Dogs were released. Roadblocks were set up. Meanwhile, Chambers and his group were moving east through the forest, staying low, using puddles and streams to mask their scent from dogs. But as the sun rose, they realized a terrifying truth. They were being followed. Boot prints appeared behind them on a muddy path. Fresh boot prints. The Germans were close. The men split up, hoping to confuse their pursuers. Kowalski headed toward a nearby village where he knew the Polish resistance sometimes hid escaped prisoners. Pratt and Chambers stayed together, heading deeper into the forest. Hours passed. Then, in the distance, the sound of gunfire. No one knew which group had been found. Chambers later wrote that every step felt like walking toward death. But by late afternoon, the forest finally opened into a clearing. And standing there were 3 armed men wearing Polish resistance armbands. Kowalski had reached them first. He had convinced them to help. The escapees were rushed into a barn, hidden under bales of hay, and fed for the first time in over 24 hours. They had survived the first day, but the war wasn't finished with them yet. For the next 3 weeks, Pratt, Kowalski, and Chambers were smuggled across rural Poland by the resistance. They stayed in farmhouses, cellars, even inside a church bell tower. Their goal was to reach a partisan group that could move them toward Allied lines. But fate took a different turn. A German patrol raided one of the safe houses. Pratt was captured, trying to flee through a nearby field. Kowalski and Chambers managed to escape through a hidden trapdoor under the kitchen table, sprinting into the woods as bullets tore through the trees behind them. Pratt was eventually returned to Stalag 21D, beaten but alive. He refused to tell the Germans anything about the escape. Kowalski and Chambers continued their journey with the resistance, eventually linking up with Soviet units later that year. Both survived the war. When the camp was liberated, German documents revealed the full extent of the chaos caused by the escape. The Germans assumed that dozens of prisoners had fled, not just 3, because no one expected a tunnel that sophisticated from such a small, unknown camp. Newspapers barely reported it. History books barely mentioned it. Yet it remains one of the boldest and most daring prison breaks of World War II. The story of the Stalag 21D escape is a reminder that you don't need hundreds of men, elaborate maps, or Hollywood-style planning to defy the odds. Sometimes, all it takes is determination, a few planks of wood, a tunnel no wider than your shoulders, and the courage to crawl toward the unknown. If you want more hidden stories like this, forgotten operations, untold battles, and the real events that shaped World War II. Make sure you subscribe to Conflict Frame. And when you're done with this video, check out the other documentaries on the channel. You'll find more unbelievable war stories you've probably never heard before.